And then he goes on to distinguish between adoration and worship, a latria, which is a word that will come into the theological vocabulary, that worship that's reserved for God alone, and different types of veneration that may be given to, shown to the saints, to the angels, to relics, holy relics, to sacred vessels or sacred images. He makes some distinctions there. Now, in the East, after Leo III dies, and he has a very long reign, well over 30 years, his successor, another Constantine, there's not a superabundance of names in the East. It's like 3 that get recycled again and again. Constantine the Fifth, who has a great nickname, Capronimus, which, let's see how to translate this delicately. Kopros would be the word for dung, and onimus, name. So you can put that in more colloquial language if you'd like. But there's a story, probably spread by his detractors, that at his baptism he had an accident in the baptismal font, and this was, it was spread about. So he is, he's the emperor for another 34 years, and he is even more anti-image than his predecessor father. He is adamant against it, adamantly against it. And one of the views that he upholds is that God cannot be depicted. For what is depicted in one person, and he who circumscribes that person has plainly circumscribed the divine nature, which is incapable of being circumscribed. So, one of those possible implications of monophysitism, right? And he's going to settle this issue once and for all. It is, in his understanding, it is the emperor who calls the council, and so he calls one. And in the year 754, the Council of Hieria. Now, if you go through the list, this is not one of those councils that appears on our list. But from the Orthodox, or from the Eastern point of view, it's called by the emperor. The bishops vote on it in union, and the emperor promulgates it. There's also the understanding in the East, to be fair, that it has to be accepted by the people. And on that level, they would say this one was never accepted by the people. The iconoclast bishops agree with everything he puts forward, calling themselves holy and ecumenical. The council taught that it was Satan who first tempted man to worship creatures instead of God, and that it was through the Mosaic law, the prophets, and most definitively through Jesus Christ, that we were led to the worship of the true God and away from idols. They elected a new iconoclast patriarch, and so if you want to find the most ancient of Byzantine icons, you do not go to Constantinople, because they were all destroyed during this period. You have to go further and further. The lands that had been conquered by the Muslims, right? So places in the Holy Land, or in southern Italy, in Sicily, in Ravenna, if you go to Italy. These are places where the images were not, because the imperial power was never strong there, the images were preserved. So if you want to see the most ancient of Eastern icons, the place to go is not the former capital, but to the very periphery. To retaliate, so it's in the East, it is the monks and the lay people who are the most adamantly against this teaching. And to get back at the monks, the emperor, first of all, forbids the wearing of religious habits in public. Then he forces a number of monks to come into the hippodrome, and he forces them to marry nuns, and then confiscates their property, sounding something like Henry VIII will do centuries later. And by the end of his reign, it was even the relics themselves and prayers for the intercession of the saints were beginning to be considered heretical by the iconoclasts. So some of the errors spreading to ever deeper levels. He lives until the year 775. So this is almost 60 full years of iconoclasm before there's two emperors with very long reigns, both very strong militarily, and at this point the the Eastern Empire begins pushing back against its adversaries in the north and in the south. And there leads to a renaissance later on, politically. In 775, Constantine's son Leo becomes the sole emperor, and he relaxed the harsh treatment against those who favored images, and they go by the name of either the iconodules or the iconophiles. The philes, the lovers of icons; the duels, those who venerate icons. Right? And he installs a patriarch who's an iconophile, Tarasius. When he dies 5 years later, leaving a son that's 9 years old by the name of Constantine, and under the regency of his mother Irene. So Irene, this is another recurring theme in Byzantium. The women empresses, the empresses tend to be most of them tend to be firmly on the side of orthodoxy, but not very good administratively, and Irene is certainly one of those. She and Patriarch Tarasius want to heal the schism, heal the wounds of division, and so with his prompting, she writes to Pope Hadrian I and suggests an ecumenical council to condemn iconoclasm. And in 786, Pope Hadrian sends 2 legates with letters and documents to Constantinople, because that's where there's going to be Constantinople IV initially. But something happens. Along with the documents were a demand that all those lands that had been seized by Leo III, so Sicily, southern Italy, the Balkan territories, would be returned to Rome. So that's one of the conditions there. Upon their arrival, Constantine VI is 16 years old and his mother's still running things. She summons other bishops to the capital to open this ecumenical council, and the military iconoclasts throw a massive protest. So for their protections, she says, we're going to have this elsewhere. Let's go back to Nicea. So this is how it becomes Nicea II, for the safety of the council itself. This is a good place to take a break, so we'll pick up from here after about a 10-minute break. Okay?